My name is Victoria. I was 28 years old when I walked into the graduation hall at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, dressed in the cap and gown I had waited 5 long years to earn. I thought that day would be about closure, about proving to myself that I had not only survived the toughest years of my life, but thrived. I was wrong. Because in the middle of that ceremony with my family watching from the stands, my father sent me a message that cut deeper than any rejection I had ever faced. The morning had started with a strange mix of anxiety and pride. The May sky was flawless, the air bright with promise. I had pulled my gown over a black dress, slipped my phone into a hidden pocket I had sewn inside, and reminded myself that today was supposed to be about the degree, not about the company, not about the doubts that still lingered in the corners of my heart. I was wrong about that, too. At exactly 7:15, my phone rang. It was Jennifer, my chief financial officer, her voice brimming with excitement. The bankers had recommended pricing our IPO at $42 per share. I froze. A quick calculation meant our company would open at just over $1 billion. By the time the market finalized the number, it was set at $44, giving Secure Connect a valuation of $1,100,000,000 on its very first day. A unicorn. One of the rarest achievements in the tech world. I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the phone. A unicorn IPO. The kind of milestone entrepreneurs dream of for decades. And it was happening at the exact same moment as my graduation. It should have been the most triumphant morning of my life. But only minutes later, another notification flashed across the screen, and everything inside me shifted. It was from my father, the man who had spent years telling me technology was a fantasy, that engineering was not for women, that I would eventually fail and come crawling back home. His words were short, cold, and final. "Do not expect any help from me going forward. You are on your own." I read the text again as if maybe I had misunderstood. I had not. On the very morning I was graduating with honors and preparing to step into the role of CEO of a billion-dollar company, my father reminded me that in his eyes I was still unworthy. I felt my chest tighten, my throat close, but I swallowed the ache. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. Because here was the truth: I had already been on my own since the day I left for MIT. I had already fought for scholarships, for sleepless nights, coding for investors who dismissed me for every inch of ground I had won. And now I stood ready to receive both a diploma and the title of leading a unicorn. The irony was almost unbearable. 2 messages. One from the man who never believed in me, another from the company I had built telling me the world finally did. And that is where my story begins. Before I tell you the rest, I want you to do one thing. If you are watching this, let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. Hit subscribe to stay with me, because this journey is not just about technology or money. It is about what happens when doubt, rejection, and silence collide with determination. As the music swelled and graduates lined up for the procession, I slipped my phone back into my dress. I stood taller than I ever had before, because no matter what message my father had sent, I knew another truth: the world was about to hear my story, whether he believed in it or not. I grew up in a house where silence spoke louder than words. My father's silence when I won awards. His silence when I built small projects that outperformed the work of my classmates. And his silence whenever I asked to be part of the business conversations he had with my brothers. That silence carried more weight than open rejection, because it told me over and over again, you do not belong here. My name is still Victoria, and I was the only daughter in a household designed to raise heirs. My father, Harold, built his construction supply company from nothing back in the 1980s. He loved to tell stories about starting out with a single truck, about counting every cent, about clawing his way into a respectable business. And in his story, men carried the torch forward. Sons became the future. Daughters learned to smile, serve dinner, and stay quiet. My brothers James and Thomas were groomed like princes. Every Saturday, Dad would take them to the warehouse, show them how to calculate margins, explain how to lead crews, or walk them through contracts. At the dinner table, he would quiz them on supply costs and leadership. When I was 8 years old, I asked if I could tag along. He chuckled, patted me on the head, and told me to help Mom in the kitchen instead. That was my first lesson. My curiosity did not matter. My mother played her role perfectly. She was a polished hostess, a flawless wife, always presenting the family as a picture of order. In private, she whispered encouragement into my ear. "You're smart. Don't forget that," but always followed with, "Don't let your father hear." She loved me, but her love was bound by fear of disrupting the order my father had built. Even as a child, I could feel the hierarchy pressing down. My brothers received cars on their 16th birthdays. I got a laptop labeled as practical for school. That single laptop, though, would change my future. At the time, it felt like a reminder that I was excluded from the privileges they enjoyed. To me, it became a door. I poured my hours into it, learning how to code, exploring math problems that no one in my house cared about. Looking back, I realize how deliberate those small dismissals were. They were not accidents. They were part of a culture my father carried like gospel women support men lead. When I beat older students in a statewide math competition, Dad shrugged and called it cute. When a newspaper wrote about an app I built in high school to manage extracurricular schedules, he muttered that computers were just a phase. I was living in a house where my victories were invisible, and yet that invisibility fueled me. If no one in my family would see me, I would make the outside world notice. That seed of defiance was planted in every slight every time I was told no. This is why years later, standing at my graduation with that cruel text from my father burning in my hand, the pain felt so familiar. It was just the latest echo of a pattern I had lived with all my life. But here's the twist I did not see coming. What was meant to break me actually became the foundation of my strength. Being overlooked taught me persistence. Being underestimated taught me creativity. And being dismissed taught me to push forward without applause. That is something I want to ask you now. Have you ever been in a place where your achievements were invisible to the very people you wanted to impress? Share it in the comments. Your words might resonate with someone who needs to hear they are not alone. As I tell you this, I want you to understand the story of Secure Connect, of the billion-dollar IPO, did not begin in a boardroom or a university lab. It began in that house at that dinner table in those weekends when I was left behind while my brothers rode with Dad to the office. It began with exclusion, and that exclusion turned into fuel. Because the more they told me I did not belong, the deeper I vowed that someday I would build a world where I did. I still remember the first time I realized how fragile approval could be in my family. I was 9 years old, standing on a stage at a state math competition. I had just beaten students 2 grades ahead of me. The audience clapped, the judges shook my hand, and my teacher whispered that I had a gift. For one small moment, I thought maybe my father would finally see me. He sat in the crowd, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. Afterward, I ran to him with my medal dangling around my neck. He looked down and said, "That's cute, Victoria. You enjoy playing with numbers." Playing. As if everything I had worked for was a child's game. That was how it always went. Achievement, dismissal, silence. My teacher even called my parents, urging them to let me take advanced classes. She said I had potential worth nurturing. My father thanked her politely, but never mentioned it again. At home, it was as though the conversation had never happened. By high school, I had stopped asking for permission. I stayed up late teaching myself coding from online tutorials. On weekends, when my brothers went with Dad to the warehouse, I stayed in my room building projects. One of those projects, a scheduling app, caught the attention of the school administration. They actually implemented it to manage extracurricular activities. The local newspaper ran a story, and I clipped it out, taped it to the refrigerator. My father glanced at it once. His response: "Computers are just a phase. Real business happens face to face." He said it like he was explaining gravity, like it was a truth no one could question. That was my life. Every small triumph was smothered by his certainty that my path was a dead end. My brothers, they were showered with milestones. On their 16th birthdays, each of them got a shiny new car parked in the driveway. The keys were handed over with a speech about responsibility and leadership. When my 16th birthday came, I unwrapped a single box. Inside was a laptop. My father said it was practical for schoolwork. I forced a smile, but deep down I knew what he thought this was no celebration. It was a tool, an obligation, a reminder to stay in my lane. What he did not realize was that the laptop would become my escape hatch. With it, I taught myself more advanced programming. With it, I started sketching the earliest pieces of what would one day become Secure Connect. Looking back, I see the pattern clearly. My father was shaping my brothers into heirs. He was shaping me into silence. But that silence backfired. It became my training ground. It taught me to find validation in the work itself rather than the applause. I share this because I know many of you watching have lived through something similar. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone brush off your dream like it was a toy? I want to hear your story because it matters more than their dismissal. Those years hardened me, but they also clarified my resolve. If Dad would not give me space, I would carve out my own. If my family would not believe in my ideas, I would learn to believe in them myself. And that is how the foundation of my company was truly born. Not in a boardroom, not even at MIT. It was born in the quiet nights when I sat with that laptop ignored by everyone in my own house, but determined to build something no one could deny. It might sound strange, but I am grateful for those moments now. Because every time my father's words stung, every time he handed the spotlight to my brothers, I added another layer of determination. I was building armor, and one day that armor would be tested in ways I could not yet imagine. The story of Secure Connect would stretch far beyond teenage coding projects. But those projects mattered because they were the first proof that even without recognition, even without applause, I could create something real. And if I could do it, then I could do it again, on a scale no one in my family ever dreamed possible. And when the acceptance letter from MIT arrived, I held it in my hands like it was a key to another universe. I had applied in secret, helped by my guidance counselor who saw what my own family refused to see. My mother's eyes lit up when I showed her. For the first time in years, she looked at me with pure pride. But she also looked nervous. She knew what my father's reaction would be. That night at the dinner table, I slid the envelope across to him. He opened it, scanned the letter, and scoffed. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. What are you going to do there, Victoria? Waste 4 years playing with computers when you could be getting real experience? Engineering is not for girls. You will struggle, you will drop out. And then what? I clenched my fists under the table. It's the top engineering school in the country, I said quietly. My voice shook, but I held his stare. He smirked. 1 year, I will pay for 1 year. Keep a perfect grade point average, work part-time to cover your expenses, and call home every week to report. After that, we will see if this is just a waste of my money. That night, as I folded clothes into my suitcase, my mother sat beside me. She tried to soften his words. He just wants to protect you from disappointment, she whispered. But I shook my head. No, Mom, he doesn't believe in me. And that was when I made the promise. I zipped up my suitcase, looked out at the dark sky, and whispered, I will show him. The next morning, as I boarded the plane to Boston, his final words echoed in my head. When this tech fantasy fails, there will always be a receptionist job waiting for you at Anderson Building Supply. I stared out the window, watching my hometown shrink beneath me, and made a vow. I would never answer phones for my father. I would build something of my own, something so undeniable even Harold Anderson would have to respect it. Arriving at MIT was like stepping into another dimension. For the first time in my life, nobody cared that I was female. Nobody dismissed me before I opened my mouth. The only question was whether I could keep up. The workload was crushing. I took a full load of computer science and business classes while working 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore to cover my expenses. Most nights I studied until 2 in the morning, grabbed 4 hours of sleep, and woke up to do it again. My roommate Natalie would find me asleep on my keyboard. "You're going to burn out," she warned. I shook my head. "I can't afford to. Dad's only paying for 1 year. After that, I need scholarships." By midterms, I was exhausted, but thriving academically. For the first time, I felt like my brain had space to breathe. MIT was hard, but it was also home. Surrounded by brilliant minds, I knew I belonged. It was during one of those classes that Professor Alan Blackwell noticed me. After I presented an encryption solution, he called me aside. "Have you considered its commercial applications?" he asked. Until then, I had been focused on survival, not innovation. But his question planted a seed, and that seed grew. Soon I was meeting with other students who shared my obsession. Zach, Diana, Marcus. We were young, restless, and driven by ideas too big for dorm walls. Every Sunday we met in my room, laptops, glowing voices, colliding slowly, sketching what would become Secure Connect. Looking back, I realize how critical that vow on the plane had been. It was more than a defiant promise. It was a map. I wasn't just running from the receptionist desk my father dangled over my head. I was running towards something greater, something I hadn't yet named, but could already feel burning inside me. I knew then if the world refused to give me a seat at the table, I would build my own table. And sooner or later, the world and my father would have no choice but to notice. Bye. Dorm rooms were never meant to hold dreams as big as ours. The walls were cracked, the air smelled faintly of ramen, and the desks were too small for the chaos we created. Yet every Sunday afternoon, that room became the birthplace of something that would one day be worth more than $1 billion. I was still Victoria, barely 20, exhausted from juggling classes and work shifts, when I opened my door to 3 faces that would change my life. Zach, the quantum computing prodigy, who coded like his fingers were lightning. Diana, who understood design so deeply she could make the most complex tool feel effortless. And Marcus, who thought like a CEO, even though he was only 19. Together we called ourselves a team, though at first all we had was determination and cheap pizza. Our idea was simple but powerful encrypted communication software for businesses that was both unbreakable and easy to use. "Most security tools make people feel like they're walking through a maze," Diana said. "We're going to make it feel like a straight line." I nodded, knowing deep down that this was bigger than any school project. I never mentioned it during my weekly calls home. My father only asked about grades and whether I was still employed at the bookstore. If I had told him about Secure Connect, he would have dismissed it as another fantasy, so I kept it quiet. Better to show him results than to hand him another chance to tell me I'd fail. By spring of freshman year, we had a prototype. It was clunky, far from perfect, but it worked. Professor Blackwell, the same mentor who had first asked about commercial applications, urged us to enter the university's annual business competition. "You're more ready than you think," he insisted. We doubted him, but we entered anyway. The night before the pitch, I called my mother instead of my father. "I might win some money tomorrow," I said carefully. She sounded happy but cautious. "What kind of business?" When I explained, she whispered, "Your father always says business is about solving problems. Sounds like you're solving a big one." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Do you think he'd be proud?" A pause. Then softly, "I think he'd be surprised." "But I already am." The next day, under the bright lights of the auditorium, we pitched Secure Connect to a panel of judges. My voice shook, but my conviction did not. When they announced we had won first place and $50,000 in seed funding, my teammates cheered so loudly, the walls shook. I sent my parents the press release that evening, a photo of us holding the oversized check. Hours later, my father texted back, "Playing entrepreneur on the university's dime. Focus on your grades." It hurt, but his dismissal only hardened me. That summer, instead of returning home, we rented a tiny office off campus with peeling paint and bad air conditioning. We paid ourselves almost nothing, surviving on instant noodles, and the belief that what we were building mattered. I called my father to say, I wouldn't need his money for sophomore year. "So you're dropping out," he said with satisfaction in his voice. "No," I answered. "I got a scholarship. And I'm building something real." Silence on the line. "Then businesses need customers. Do you have any?" "Not yet, but we would." That moment defined me more than I realized. Because standing in that shabby office, surrounded by friends who had become family, I understood something important. My father's doubt was fuel, but my teammates' belief was fire. Together we were more than a group of students. We were founders. And the first spark of Secure Connect had been lit. And if you've ever tried to start something of your own, even small, drop a comment below. I want to hear how you fought through the doubt. Because stories like yours deserve to be told too. That was the summer we stopped dreaming and started building. And once the building began, there was no turning back. Rejection has a sound. For me, it was the sharp click of a door closing after another investor meeting. By the time sophomore year ended, I had heard that sound more times than I could count. We thought the hardest part would be building the product. It wasn't. The hardest part was convincing anyone that 4 college students could protect sensitive corporate data better than the giants already on the market. We rehearsed our pitch until we could say it in our sleep. Marcus stood tall and confident, Diana showcased her designs, Zach wowed with technical brilliance, and I told the story of why Secure Connect mattered. But it didn't matter how polished we were. Investors leaned back in their leather chairs, tapping pens against notepads, before delivering the same verdict: you lack experience. Some were even more blunt. Bring on a male co-founder. It will help with credibility. Those words cut deeper than any late-night coding session. It wasn't just about our age, it was about me. They saw a young woman leading a security startup and immediately assumed fragility, naivete, failure. After the 15th rejection, Marcus sighed. "No one trusts security software from college kids." His voice carried the weight of our dwindling funds. I looked around at my team, at the tired faces of people who had poured every ounce of themselves into this, and I made a choice. "Then we stopped looking like college kids," I said. That night we rebranded. We built professional slides, ordered business cards, and put on suits borrowed from older cousins. We practiced our delivery until every word landed with precision. But even with polished edges, the answer was still too often no. One night after a particularly brutal meeting, I sat on a park bench under flickering streetlights. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Against my better judgment, I called home. My mother answered, and I heard her familiar voice tremble when I whispered, "Maybe Dad was right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." She paused, then spoke with more steel than I had ever heard from her before. "Your father has been wrong about many things. Don't make him right by giving up." Her words hit me like oxygen after drowning. The very next morning, I walked into another pitch meeting. This one with Artemis Ventures, a smaller firm led by a woman named Catherine. She listened not just politely, but intently. She asked questions no one else had bothered to ask, drilling into the technical details, as though she respected our minds. Then she leaned forward and said words I'll never forget. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago. Brilliant, determined, and underestimated. I'm going to invest $500,000 for 10% of your company. And I'll introduce you to the best lawyer I know." I nearly broke down right there, but Catherine wasn't finished. "Promise me one thing," she said. "When you succeed, and you will, you'll remember what it felt like to be dismissed because of your age and gender. And you'll help the next young woman who shows up with a brilliant idea." My throat tightened. "I promise." Walking out of her office, the city felt different. The rejection still echoed in my memory, but now it was muted by a louder sound. Someone had finally said yes. Of course, the struggle wasn't over. The lawsuits, the sleepless nights, the migraines, they would all come. But at least now we had a lifeline. At least now I could call my team together and say, "We're not dreaming anymore. We're building, and someone believes in us." If you've ever been told you're too young, too inexperienced, or simply not enough, let this part sink in. Drop a comment if you know that sting, because someone out there needs to hear they're not alone. That was the season when rejection stopped being a wall. It became a staircase, and step by step we climbed higher. The ink on Catherine's investment agreement was barely dry when everything about Secure Connect began to shift. $500,000 was more than just capital. It was a vote of confidence, a shield against doubt, and a bridge out of the cycle of rejection we had been trapped in for months. I gathered my team in our cramped office, the same peeling walls, the same broken blinds. But that night it felt different. I laid the check on the desk. "We're not surviving anymore," I told them. "We're building." For the first time in weeks, their faces lit up with the kind of hope that had fueled us in the very beginning. Catherine did more than give us money. She gave us connections. She brought in a lawyer who dismantled the lawsuit that had been threatening to drain us dry. She introduced us to mentors who had walked this road before. And perhaps most importantly, she stood beside me at investor meetings, not as a savior, but as proof. Proof that women could build lead and command respect. But it wasn't easy. Growth never is. The calls from clients didn't magically pour in. We still had to chase leads, refine our software, and prove that our encryption was stronger than anything on the market. Yet with every rejection, Catherine's words echoed in my mind. "When you succeed, remember this moment. Remember what it feels like to be underestimated." One night when I was too tired to code another line, I sat across from her at a late dinner. She watched me push food around my plate and said, "Victoria, you're carrying this company on your back. You need to learn to lead without breaking yourself." Her tone wasn't gentle. It was commanding. For the first time, I realized she wasn't just an investor, she was a mentor, and maybe even the role model I had needed all along. Of course, I still called home every Sunday. My father's questions never changed. "How are your grades? Are you still working?" I never mentioned Secure Connect. He wouldn't have believed me anyway. Better to let time reveal the truth. The following spring, our first real breakthrough came. A small financial advisory firm agreed to use our software. $10,000, barely enough to cover 2 months of expenses, but to us it was gold. We celebrated with greasy pizza, and for the first time, I allowed myself to think, this might actually work. I thought about calling my father that night. Thought about telling him I had just been paid for something I built with my own hands. But the memory of his dismissals stopped me. "Not yet," I told myself. "When it's undeniable, then he'll know." What I didn't realize was that this tiny client would lead to more. 1 became 5, 5 became 12. By the end of that semester, we were hiring developers and moving into a bigger office. The transformation was dizzying, but even in the middle of the whirlwind, Catherine reminded me of the bigger picture. "Victoria," she said during one of our meetings, "don't forget your promise. This isn't just about you, it's about the women who will come after you. When they're dismissed, they need to know there's someone waiting to open the door." Her words branded themselves into my memory. That promise would follow me all the way to IPO and beyond. And maybe this is a good moment to turn to you, the person listening to my story. Have you ever had someone step in and believe in you when no one else would? If you have, share it in the comments. Stories of unexpected allies can change the way we see our own journeys. That was the season when everything began to change, not because we had solved every problem, but because we finally had someone in our corner. Someone who had been there before, someone who refused to let me give up. Looking back now, I see it clearly. Catherine didn't just invest in Secure Connect, she invested in me. And that single act of faith transformed the trajectory of everything that followed. Success has a strange way of inviting chaos. The more clients we signed, the more the pressure mounted. By the summer after sophomore year, Secure Connect had grown faster than any of us expected. We had real revenue, a bigger office, and a team that looked less like a handful of students and more like a company. But that growth carried weight none of us were prepared to hold. It began with one disastrous phone call. A financial client claimed they had suffered a security breach. Their data was compromised, and they pointed the finger squarely at us. We knew the truth. They had ignored our installation guidelines. Still in the public eye, we were guilty until proven innocent. I hadn't slept in 48 hours, scrambling with Zach and Diana to patch their system, fielding angry emails and trying to stop our fragile reputation from collapsing. My head pounded. My hands shook as I clutched coffee after coffee. In an emergency meeting, Marcus laid it out flat. "We can't afford a lawsuit. We have 3 months of runway left. If they sue, we're done." Silence settled over the room. I could feel the weight of my team's eyes pressing into me, waiting for me to lead. But inside, I was falling apart. My vision blurred from exhaustion, and I wondered if my father's words were finally coming true. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Then Catherine called. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Victoria, this is what leadership looks like. It's messy, it's brutal, and it doesn't let you sleep. But listen carefully, you are not powerless. You need the right allies. Find capital, find legal protection, now." Her urgency snapped me awake. We pitched to every venture capital firm in Boston, dragging ourselves into boardrooms with bloodshot eyes and desperate energy. The rejections were almost identical. "Your technology is promising, but you need a seasoned CEO. Come back when you're older." Some even repeated the insult I had heard before. Maybe a male co-founder would strengthen credibility. Each rejection dug deeper, but I refused to collapse. Finally, Catherine pulled me into her office. "You don't need every investor. You need the right one. Choose wisely." She became our anchor. She connected us to a top-tier lawyer who negotiated the client down to a settlement that cost a fraction of what they had demanded. We lost money, yes, but we kept our company alive. And in that fire, I learned one of the hardest lessons of entrepreneurship: document. Everything, set boundaries, and never assume goodwill will protect you. But the stress had taken its toll. My migraines worsened. My weight dropped without me noticing, and insomnia became my constant companion. My academic advisor called me in one afternoon, worry in her eyes. "You need to make a choice, your company or your degree. You can't keep both at this pace." Her words stung. Dropping out would mean proving my father right, but walking away from Secure Connect felt like abandoning my own child. I negotiated for part-time status extending graduation, but buying myself time to lead. It wasn't balance, but it was survival. I would walk into our warehouse-turned-office, see the faces of 15 employees who depended on me, and feel my chest tighten with fear. What if I failed them? What if my father had been right all along? But here's the truth: fear can sharpen you if you let it. It can hollow you out, yes, but it can also carve new space for resilience. Each time I thought I was breaking, I found a way to bend instead. And that's something I want you to think about too. When life corners you, when you feel like you have nothing left, what kept you standing? Share it below because someone might need your survival story today. Looking back, that period wasn't just a crisis, it was my transformation. I stopped being just a coder, just a student with an idea. I became a leader forged by fire. And though the scars from that time never fully left, they became the reason I was strong enough to face what came next. By the fall of my senior year, the storm finally broke into sunlight. After years of scrambling for validation, sleepless nights, and rejection after rejection, Secure Connect delivered a breakthrough that changed everything. Our team had refined the encryption algorithm again and again, pushing it beyond what anyone believed possible. Then, one crisp October morning, Zach ran into the office holding a stack of test results. His face was pale with disbelief. "It's faster," he whispered, "and stronger. We just built something no one else has." I stared at the numbers on the page. They were undeniable. Our software wasn't just secure, it was efficient. For the first time, businesses could have both. No more choosing between clunky protection and usability. It was like striking oil in our own backyard. When we rolled out the update, the response was immediate. Regional firms became national clients. Monthly revenue tripled in just 60 days. Phones rang off the hook. Emails flooded in. We were no longer a scrappy student project. We were a company every competitor was suddenly afraid of. That surge of demand brought new challenges. We had to hire quickly engineers, designers, salespeople. We moved into a larger office with glass walls and desks lined up in neat rows. It should have felt like victory, but I was terrified. Each new hire was a person trusting me with their livelihood. Each contract was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. That was when Jennifer Lawrence walked into my life. A seasoned CFO in her 50s with 2 successful exits under her belt, she carried herself with a calm authority I envied. During her first week, she pulled me aside. "Victoria," she said, "you've built something remarkable. But you're growing too fast without discipline. Let me help you make this sustainable." Under her guidance, we overhauled our pricing, streamlined cash flow, and finally started thinking beyond the next week. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight alone. Jennifer was more than an executive. She was a mentor, someone who had seen it all before and knew every hidden trap. Landing our first Fortune 500 client should have been the moment to finally call my father and prove him wrong, and so I did. "Dad," I said, voice trembling with pride, "Secure Connect just signed a 7-figure contract with Allied Financial." There was silence on the line. Then his reply came, "That's significant. But tech companies come and go. How sustainable is your business? Are you profitable yet?" My stomach dropped. We weren't. Every cent we earned went back into growth. And when I hesitated, he filled the silence. "That's what I thought. Don't let this distract you from finishing your degree. You'll need something to fall back on when the bubble bursts." I hung up the phone deflated. Would anything ever be enough? That night, Jennifer found me staring at spreadsheets long after the office emptied. "He doesn't get it, does he?" she said softly. I shook my head. She smiled sadly. My father was the same. He thought women belonged in nursing or teaching. He never once stepped into my corner office. So I stopped trying to make him proud. Instead, I made him respect me. Pride and respect, they're not the same thing. You may never get the first, but you can demand the second. Her words landed like truth I had been waiting years to hear. And in that moment, I stopped chasing my father's pride. I started chasing something bigger. And maybe that's where I'll pause to pull you in. Have you ever tried to win the approval of someone who never gave it? Did you ever realize that respect might be the only thing left to fight for? Share it in the comments, because sometimes telling the story is the first step toward letting go. The 18 months that followed were a whirlwind, expanding from 40 employees to 120, moving into a gleaming tower downtown, raising a $12 million Series A led by Catherine herself. We were in the headlines, celebrated as the female-founded startup, rewriting the rules of enterprise security. But through it all, one thought pulsed in the back of my mind: I will stop begging for pride. I will build so much that respect becomes the only option. And that decision, born out of disappointment, would shape the way I faced the most pivotal day of my life, graduation day, the IPO, and my father's final test. Graduation was supposed to be a simple ceremony, a celebration of persistence. For me, it became the stage where two worlds collided: the student who had fought tooth and nail for a diploma, and the CEO about to lead a company valued at more than $1 billion. By my 5th year at MIT, I was technically a part-time student, taking just 1 or 2 classes each semester. Secure Connect consumed my life, but I refused to drop out. Dropping out would mean proving my father right, and that was something I couldn't allow. My advisor surprised me with the news: "Victoria, you've completed enough credits. You'll graduate this May with honors." The words stunned me. I had lost track, buried under the weight of my company, but somehow I had made it. That spring, our board was also finalizing the decision to take Secure Connect public. The IPO market was hot, and Jennifer believed the timing was perfect. We had filed with the SEC, worked endless hours with bankers and lawyers, and prepared our financials for scrutiny. It felt surreal that my academic finish line lined up perfectly with the launch of our company onto the world stage. The night before graduation, Jennifer called. "The bankers want to price higher. Demand is incredible. We could be looking at a valuation over $1 billion. My heart stopped. A unicorn. On day 1, "Yes," she said simply. "It's rare, Victoria. Really rare." I hung up the phone and stared at my cap and gown hanging on the wall. I had dreamed of this day for so long, but never like this. I should have been thinking about speeches, family photos, dinners after the ceremony. Instead, my mind raced with stock prices and valuation charts. The morning came bright and cloudless. I walked toward campus, nerves rattling in my chest. My mother was there, radiant in a blue dress. My brothers wore suits, smiling awkwardly. And then there was my father, rigid posture, sharp suit eyes, cool and unreadable. When I approached, he extended a hand. "Congratulations on finishing your degree," he said as though checking a box. Not a hug. Not an ounce of warmth. Just acknowledgement. As we made small talk, I mentioned a reservation at a fine Cambridge restaurant. He raised an eyebrow. "Business must be going well." I said nothing more, letting the IPO speak for itself when the time came. When the announcement came for graduates to line up, I hugged my mother and walked away. As I moved toward the procession, I overheard my father murmur to my brothers, "At least she finished. She'll need that degree when this tech bubble bursts." The words burned, but I refused to let them show. Inside the auditorium, the air buzzed with excitement. Students snapped selfies, families waved from the stands. My phone, tucked into a hidden pocket, vibrated. Jennifer's message flashed, pricing confirmed at $44 per share. Valuation $1,100,000,000. Press release in 15 minutes. My knees went weak. Secure Connect wasn't just real, it was history. Then the ceremony began. The speeches blurred together. My mind was split between the stage in front of me and the stock market across town. When they called my name, Victoria Marie Anderson, Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Engineering with honors, I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, while my phone buzzed again and again, with messages from employees, investors, reporters. The contrast was staggering. On one side, a dean shaking my hand. On the other, the birth of a public company worth more than $1 billion. That day I stood in two worlds at once: student, CEO, graduate, unicorn founder. And I'll let you in on something now. Life sometimes collides in ways that feel impossible. Has there ever been a moment where two huge chapters of your life overlapped at once? Share it in the comments, because those collisions often mark the turning points we never forget. The moment I stepped off that stage, diploma in one hand, phone buzzing in the other, I realized this wasn't just my graduation, it was my reckoning. And my father, sitting stiffly in the crowd, was about to see a truth he had spent years refusing to believe. The auditorium hummed with music tassels swinging as graduates crossed the stage. My phone kept vibrating against my leg, each buzz a reminder that history was unfolding beyond these walls. Employees, investors, reporters, everyone wanted my attention. But one vibration cut deeper than the rest. It was a text from my father, 14 words that sliced through me like a blade. "Do not expect any help from me going forward. You are on your own." I froze. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. On the very morning I had earned my degree with honors. On the very morning my company had crossed the threshold into unicorn status. On the very morning I should have been celebrating, my father decided to remind me that I was still unworthy in his eyes. I felt the air drain from my lungs. For a second I thought I might collapse right there on the polished stage floor. My eyes burned, but I refused to let tears fall. Not in front of my classmates. Not in front of him. As the dean placed the diploma in my hand and cameras flashed, I forced a smile. I shook his hand, nodded for the photographer, and walked back to my seat with my back straight. Inside, I was shattered. Then, as though the universe refused to let my father's voice have the last word, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Jennifer, her voice spilling out over the line when I answered quietly. "Victoria, the IPO is a massive success. Shares are already trading up in private placement. We're over 1 billion. CNBC and Bloomberg are calling. You did it." I blinked hard, fighting to keep my composure, but I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. $1 billion IPO. I can hardly believe it. A murmur spread through the rows around me. Heads turned. Whispers rose. $1 billion IPO. She's the CEO. The secret was out. The story was no longer confined to stock exchanges and press releases. It was unfolding right here in this hall of graduates. And then across the sea of caps and gowns, my eyes found my father in Section C. He was holding his phone, reading the same news alerts now exploding across every major network. For years he had told me I would fail. For years he had painted me as fragile, naive, incapable. And now, minutes after telling me I was on my own, he was confronted with the undeniable truth his daughter had just become the CEO of a public company worth more than $1 billion. Our eyes locked. His face, usually unreadable, betrayed a flicker of something I had never seen before. It wasn't pride, it wasn't warmth. It was respect, raw, reluctant, but real. I looked away because if I didn't, the tears might finally win. Graduation continued around me, but I barely heard a word. My phone buzzed relentlessly with congratulations, with requests, with opportunities. But all I could think about was the text still burned into my screen. Why that message? Why on that day I wanted to scream at him to demand why he couldn't give me even 1 ounce of encouragement. But another part of me already knew. For men like my father, admitting they were wrong was harder than moving mountains. And maybe that was why fate timed it this way, so that his rejection would crash against the tidal wave of my success. To you listening right now, I want to ask, have you ever reached a milestone only to have someone you love try to dim your light? Tell me in the comments, because your resilience might inspire someone else to keep shining. As the recessional music swelled and we filed out diploma clutched in my hand, I took a deep breath. My father's words still echoed, but this time they didn't feel like chains. They felt like fuel. Because if I could carry that kind of weight and still rise, then maybe I was stronger than I had ever believed. Walking out of the auditorium, I felt like 2 different people living in the same skin. One was the graduate clutching a diploma, the other was the CEO holding news of a billion-dollar IPO in her pocket. My classmates laughed, posed for photos, and waved to families. I smiled too, but mine felt brittle. Inside, I was still replaying my father's text over and over like a wound I couldn't stop touching. Yet something unexpected happened the moment I stepped into the crowd outside. My phone lit up again, not with rejections, not with dismissals, but with headlines. Major outlets were already publishing stories about Secure Connect. Female-founded security startup becomes unicorn. Youngest CEO on Wall Street today. My name splashed across screens everywhere. The whispers began first among students, then parents, then professors. She's the one I overheard, the girl whose company went public this morning. Everywhere I turned, eyes followed. Curiosity, awe, even envy. It was all there reflecting back at me. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, my stomach knotted when I saw him. My father stood a few steps apart from the rest of my family, phone in hand, face pale. He had read the news. There was no denying it now. His daughter, the one he had dismissed, belittled, and doubted for years, had just crossed a threshold most entrepreneurs never reach. Our eyes met across the lawn. For years I had chased that look, hoping to see pride, to hear words of affirmation. What I saw was different. Not pride, not love. Something colder, but somehow heavier respect. It was as though the fortress of his disbelief had finally cracked, and through the cracks, he saw me not as a fragile girl, but as a force he could no longer ignore. That glance was worth more than the ceremony, more than the applause of strangers. Because for the first time in my life, he could not diminish me. I walked over to my mother, who hugged me tight, tears spilling down her cheeks. My brothers congratulated me awkwardly, unsure how to process the tidal wave of attention suddenly surrounding their sister. But my father stayed quiet, rigid, his gaze never leaving me. In that silence, I realized something I had never allowed myself to believe. I no longer needed his approval. I had been searching for it all these years, but standing there surrounded by recognition from the world, I understood that his respect, forced though it was enough. And maybe that's the truth some of you need to hear too. Sometimes the people closest to you will never give you the words you want. But when you push forward anyway, when you succeed in spite of them, their silence becomes its own confession. Have you ever felt that shift, where their doubt turned into quiet respect? Share it in the comments. I promise your story matters. That afternoon, professors I admired stopped me on the lawn. Reporters tried to corner me for quotes. Classmates I barely knew asked for photos, eager to say they had graduated beside the unicorn CEO. I nodded politely, still dazed, still holding tight to the fragile moment that had just unfolded with my father's eyes. Because though he said nothing, though his lips never formed the words, I'm proud I had finally seen what I needed. Proof that I was no longer invisible. Proof that the daughter he once dismissed had carved her own place in a world far larger than his. And in that realization, I found something I had never expected to feel on that stage freedom. The celebration lunch at Harvest should have been a moment of joy. I had reserved a private room in one of Cambridge's finest restaurants, a quiet place to mark both my graduation and Secure Connect's extraordinary milestone. Yet from the moment we sat down, I could feel the tension radiating from my father like static in the air. My mother tried to smooth things over, asking about the ceremony and ordering champagne. My brothers made small comments about the news they'd seen on their phones, questions about stock prices, and whether I was already a billionaire. But my father sat rigid eyes, sharp, waiting. Finally, he spoke, his tone flat. You kept this from us deliberately, planned your big reveal for maximum effect. I met his gaze evenly. The IPO process was confidential. I couldn't disclose details before the official announcement. And honestly, would you have believed me if I had told you I slid my phone across the table, the screen still open to his earlier text? Do not expect any help from me going forward. You are on your own. My mother gasped. Harold, you didn't. He flushed but stiffened. I was acknowledging her independence. She's made it clear she doesn't need family support. I leaned forward, my voice steady. That's not what you meant. You've never believed in me. You've been waiting for me to fail since the day I left for MIT. You told me I'd end up answering phones. You told me my work was a fantasy. And yet here I am. The room fell silent. Nearby, I noticed heads turning. Other diners had recognized me from the news, and some even lifted their phones recording. This wasn't just a family argument anymore, it was a public reckoning. My father's jaw tightened. This isn't the place for this discussion. No, I said, my voice firm but calm. This is exactly the place. Because for years you dismissed me in private. Today, the world knows what I've built. And you will hear it from me directly. I did this without your approval. I did it without your support. And I did it while you bet against me. James surprised me by speaking up. Dad, she's right. Secure Connect isn't hype. I looked into it last year. Their client list is solid. My father turned on him, eyes blazing. You knew about this. I knew she was successful, James admitted. I didn't know about the IPO, but I knew enough to respect her work. For a moment, Harold Anderson was speechless. A man who had built his life on control, on having the last word, suddenly had none. And maybe that was when something shifted in me. For years, I had imagined this confrontation with anger, with shouting, with tears. But instead, I felt strangely calm, stronger, clearer. Dad, I said softly, I didn't build Secure Connect to prove you wrong. I built it because I believed in it. But your text today reminded me of a truth I've lived with since I was 18. I have been on my own since the day I left for MIT. And look what I accomplished without you. Silence hung over the table. My brothers looked stunned. My mother's eyes glistened with tears. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again, no words coming. That silence felt like victory. And now let me turn this to you. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who doubted you your entire life? What did you say when you finally faced them? Share it in the comments, because sometimes courage is contagious. As I gathered my things to leave for my CNBC interview later that afternoon, I realized something profound. I no longer needed my father's belief to validate me. I had carried myself this far through rejection, exhaustion, and doubt. I was not the girl begging for approval anymore. I was the woman demanding respect. And in that restaurant with the world watching, I finally claimed it. I left the restaurant that afternoon with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me: anger, relief, exhaustion, and something I couldn't quite name yet. The Blacktown car Jennifer had sent was waiting outside. She hugged me the second I stepped in. There she is, the woman of the hour. We're already up 60% from IPO pricing. The market loves us. Her enthusiasm felt like sunlight against the cold shadow my father had left behind. I leaned back in the leather seat, glancing out the window just long enough to see him emerge from the restaurant phone, clutched in his hand, his face unreadable. For once, Harold Anderson had no control over the story. The world wasn't listening to him anymore. It was listening to me. Those next 24 hours blurred into a frenzy. CNBC Bloomberg. The Wall Street Journal, everyone wanted interviews. Employees filled the office, cheering, popping champagne, toasting not just the company, but the journey we had all survived together. At one point, I stood in the middle of our glass-walled headquarters, watching balloons bounce near the ceiling, laughter spilling into every corner, and realized this wasn't just my victory. It belonged to all of us. But late that night, when the noise quieted and the office emptied, I finally faced myself in the silence. I sat at my desk, diploma in one hand, my father's text glowing on the other screen. "You are on your own." He was right in a way. I had been on my own since I was 18. And yet on my own, I had built something worth over $1 billion. On my own, I had hired more than 150 people who trusted their livelihoods to me. On my own, I had protected the sensitive data of millions across the globe. The realization hit me with an odd sense of peace. I didn't need his apology anymore. I didn't need him to say he was proud. My life was bigger than his opinion. The next day, my brothers and mother came to tour Secure Connect headquarters. Their eyes widened as they walked past rows of developers, analysts, and engineers working on our core encryption systems. Thomas shook his head. I had no idea it was this big. I looked at him with a small smile. "What did you think I'd been doing all these years?" He hesitated, shame flickering across his face. "Honestly, Dad made it sound like you were playing around with a glorified school project. I should have made up my own mind. I'm sorry, Victoria." It was a small crack in the wall that had divided us for so long, but I welcomed it. Because for the first time, I wasn't alone in recognizing the truth. That afternoon, Jennifer walked into my office with an amused expression. "Your father called," she said, dropping into the chair across from me. "He wants to know if you'd consider joining the board of Anderson Building Supply." His exact words were, "Her business expertise would be valuable to our company." I laughed out loud, the sound surprising even me. After years of dismissing my abilities, suddenly he wanted to leverage them. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I said you were in meetings all day, but I'd pass along the message." She raised an eyebrow. "What should I tell him when he calls back?" For a brief moment, the temptation burned. I wanted to say no, to make him taste the rejection he had forced down my throat for years. But then I remembered Catherine's voice, reminding me that true power is not improving others wrong, but improving yourself right. "Tell him I'd be happy to discuss potential synergies," I said slowly, "but Secure Connect remains my priority." Jennifer's smile widened. "Taking the high road. I'd expect nothing less from you." That night, as I prepared for another round of media interviews, I realized what that unnamed feeling inside me had been since leaving the restaurant. Freedom. Freedom from chasing his approval. Freedom from shrinking under his shadow. Freedom to define success on my own terms. And maybe that's what I want you to take from this part of my story. What does freedom mean to you? Is it walking away from someone's doubt, or is it proving yourself right in spite of them? Share your answer in the comments, because freedom once claimed changes everything. As I closed my laptop and looked out at the Boston skyline glittering beneath me, I knew one thing for sure. The world had changed, and so had I. 1 year after that unforgettable graduation day, I stood once again in the same auditorium at MIT. But this time, I wasn't walking across the stage as a student. I was standing at the podium as a guest lecturer, looking out at rows of eager faces, students who reminded me so much of myself. Young, ambitious, half excited, and half terrified of the future. The memory of everything that had happened still burned vividly inside me. The IPO, the confrontation with my father, the whirlwind of attention, the sleepless nights that followed. Secure Connect had stabilized at a market cap of over $1.6 billion, employing hundreds of people and protecting the data of millions. And yet the question on my mind that day was not about numbers. It was about meaning. I gripped the podium and began. Success, I told them, is not about proving others wrong, though that can be satisfying for a moment. True success is about proving yourself right about taking the vision you carry inside and refusing to let it die no matter who doubts you. The room fell silent. Every student leaned forward. They weren't here for buzzwords. They were here for truth. I told them about the nights coding until dawn, about the humiliating rejections from investors, about the cruel text I received just before crossing the graduation stage. I told them about the silence of my father's belief and how I had finally learned to stop needing it. Then a young woman in the front row raised her hand. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Did your father ever admit he was wrong about you?" The auditorium froze waiting. It was the question everyone wanted to ask. I smiled not bitterly, but softly. No. He never admitted he was wrong, and I no longer need him to. What matters is that I believed in myself long enough to reach this point. What matters is the hundreds of employees who trust me, the clients who rely on our technology, and the young women who now see that their dreams are possible. His approval is not my validation. My work is. Applause erupted, echoing through the hall. As I stepped off the stage, my phone buzzed. A message from him. "Saw your lecture was live-streamed. Well said." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't pride. But for him, it was something. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need more. I had already won. Because freedom is not waiting for someone to hand you recognition. Freedom is building a life so undeniable that their silence no longer matters. And maybe this is where I'll leave you with a choice. If you've ever built something in the shadow of doubt, let me know in the comments what kept you going. Was it anger, hope, stubbornness? Your answer might light the way for someone else. And if you've stayed with me through this journey, make sure you subscribe, because there are more stories, more lessons, and more truths we need to uncover together. That lecture wasn't just the closing of a circle, it was the opening of a new one. A reminder that the only validation that truly matters is the kind you give yourself. And for me, that was enough. When I look back now, the journey feels both impossible and inevitable. Impossible because the girl who was once told she belonged answering phones had no roadmap, no hand guiding her steps. I was dismissed, underestimated, and even disowned in moments when I needed love the most. And yet inevitable, because every rejection became fuel, every wound became armor, and every doubt became a stepping stone. I no longer chased my father's approval. That pursuit ended the day I realized I had already built something so much larger than his narrow vision. What matters now are the lives changed by Secure Connect, the employees who found careers within our walls, the clients whose data we protected, and the young women who saw in my journey a reflection of their own potential. Foundations, scholarships, mentorships. They are no longer just abstract promises. They are the continuation of the vow I once whispered to Catherine to open doors for those dismissed before they even begin. Because no dream should die in silence simply because someone powerful said you can't. And maybe that's what I want you to carry with you now. Not the billion-dollar headlines, not the IPO celebrations, but the reminder that success is deeply personal. It is not about shouting back at those who doubted you. It is about standing tall enough that their voices no longer reach you. So wherever you are listening from whatever dream you've tucked away, I hope you take this story as proof your vision matters. Your fight matters, and the only validation you ever truly need is the kind you give yourself. And if this story spoke to you, stay with me. Because the journey doesn't end here, it only begins again.